you go. So let's do Sunny. So I'm going to suggest that you start from scratch here. In many cases, it's easier to just start over than it is to try to undo all the other damage that's been done. There's no reason to throw away the version that you've already worked on or any of that kind of stuff, whatever. It's just I'm gonna start this from scratch. We're gonna talk about some strategy with this and go from there. So I'm going to start with this complete virgin copy of her. So Sunny's sitting up on the top. Again, I'm going to double click on the hand to actually kick this out. I'm going to come over to this and I actually am going to lock this layer. So I've activated Sunny and I'm going to click on the padlock to lock everything. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a copy of this. You'll notice that the copy is locked as well, so I'm going to unlock that because I want to actually be able to work on this copy. So again, the one that's down at the bottom, fine, whatever. I'm going to double click on this name and I'm going to rename it New Virgin, and you'll see why in just a second. And so, and then we need to look at this, and I need to make an assessment about this image when I'm actually looking at it before I even begin on this, because what you don't want to ultimately get into is that you don't want to go through half of this process and then realize that you need to make what we call a new virgin, which is what we're going to do with this one right here. The reason I'm going to make the new virgin here is that I know that this area that I'm confident I can get this area of hair off of this. I'm confident that I can get the shoulder and I can separate the sweater. I'm nervous about this part right in here. It's the hair part in here that makes me nervous. This edge over here I'm feeling pretty confident about. So the only thing that's really got me paranoid in this whole image is really separating the hair, the skin from the hair in this whole little line right there. And I know you guys went through this process and that's probably the wall that you ran into. Now, other walls presented themselves as well, but that one is a really, really, really big one. So what I am going to suggest that you do in thinking about this is that you can look at this area that's of all the, so I'm going to take it in bits and pieces. I know I've got to separate this part down in here, but this part up in here, why on earth would I go after that skin? Why wouldn't I just cover that with hair and eliminate that problem? Right? So it's thinking about dealing with this in other ways. Just because you've been charged with separating the skin from the hair, you can look at problem areas like this and say, oh my God, there's no way, I'm never gonna get this thing out, so I'm just gonna I'm gonna fill that whole thing in with hair, and then I don't have to separate it. So, what I tell people is this all the time. My job, the one number thing that's on my list of things that I have got to do for everybody in this room is I need to teach you how to lie. That's what this is all about. That's what, in my opinion, photography is in large measure about. Now, you may have completely different feelings about photography. You may feel like it is the truth. It's your journey to find the path to enlightenment. Fine. For me, it's about lying. I shoot advertising, I shoot fashion. It's all a fantasy. There's none of that's real. So that's the way I approach this stuff as well. There's no real compelling reason for me to keep this real. Does that make sense, everybody? So now a lot of you guys would actually go in to actually fix this part, and you would use, clone stamp tool is an obvious one, so let's actually do that. I'm going to zip up here, right in here, and I'm going to use the clone stamp tool. It's the S key if you want to use the keyboard shortcut for that, or it's this little tool that looks like a stamp right here. If you click on the drop-down menu, you'll see that there's two options in here. One is the clone stamp tool, the other is the pattern stamp tool. We are using the clone stamp tool. If you click on your drop-down menu, you will actually notice that in the clone stamp tool, you can control, it's a brush, you can control it. In the case of doing this, and this is something that we need to have a conversation about, one of the problems that you run into in using the clone stamp tool is this. If I keep my edge at a 100% hard edge and I go in and I paint with this guy, it will actually give me a perfectly hard edge. However, usually you'll spot that transition. You'll see where the new cloning is compared to the old original image. You can spot that part. So then, instead, what a lot of people do is they'll actually make their brush completely soft. They'll do a completely soft one. The problem with that is that you're now where the transition where you're going from new cloning to old, there's a soft edge, and that soft edge of transition means that you're laying new texture on old texture, but the old texture is showing through in part of it. You can also spot that. So we need a compromise, and the compromise is usually somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to set my compromise, my brush at 50% hardness. I don't want my edge so obvious that I see it, what a hard edge would be, but I also don't want that competing texture to be as obvious as it would be if I was using a completely soft brush. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I've zoomed into about 200%. You can see it down here at the bottom. I'm going to hold down the Option key. Again, I'm working on my new virgin layer, so I'm not worried about losing. If everything all goes to hell, I've still got the one down at the very bottom that I can use to reconstruct what I just screwed up. So anyway, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to hold down the Option key and do a sample to give me a sample point up in here. And I'm going to come over into this area and I'm going to click and I'm sort of going to paint my way down along this to sort of fill that part in. And I'm going to probably hit it a little bit again right there and something like that. And it works reasonably well, but the problem that I have with this is that if you're really astute about doing this, you can spot that there is a repeating issue. So the hair that I've got going right here, I'll do this on the screen so you guys can match it. The hair that's actually happening right here is also happening right here again. It's because I've got these two that are in, yeah, Michael?
When I did the carbon stamp, it like painted super dark.
Actually, it sure did. So you're in your new virgin layer. You got multiplies your blending mode for the brush. So go back in history and undo all that and change your brush blending mode to normal. Katie?
When I try to use this,
That's because your layer is still locked. Unlock your layer. Say OK. Lock. And now do it. So, but you guys get the repeating part, right? The repeating pattern part. And it's this thing that you always spot with the clone stamping tool. If it's actually set up to be, it's just this one-to-one. So where everything started on one side, they end up being exactly on the other side. Are you guys familiar with that being a problem? Yeah. Right? So what we need to do is we need to modify this so it doesn't work quite the same way. And so that's what I'm going to suggest. If you've done the clone stamping work, I'm going to say please throw that away. So I'm going to go back to my history palette and I'm simply going to go back before I did the clone stamping part to where I've just got the name change. Everybody good on this? So we've just undone, we've gotten rid of the cloning. Although again, the cloning actually worked pretty well. I would probably, well here, let me show you what I would do. If I was really worried about the repeating pattern being such an issue right here, what I would probably do then is sample a completely new place here just to kill the repeating pattern part so that I didn't have that same swipe of hair right here showing up in this part right in here. And if we zoom out on this, I'm going to double click the hand again to kick back out. It actually doesn't look too bad. I mean, when I'm looking at this, I'm picking up some repeating pattern right here, a little bit that's happening right in here as well. So I'm getting some of it, but for the most part, and again, because it's a relatively inconsequential area anyway, it's not too bad. However, there's other times when you're going to get into doing hair where you're going to need a whole lot more than this, so I'm going to show you the other way to do this, or the way I would do it. I'm going to go back to name change, so I've undone all of my cloning work right here. I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso to what I'm doing. The trick to doing this is that you can select too small of an area, you can never really select too big of an area, so you wouldn't want to select a really small area of hair to try to build the patch for this. I'm going to actually select this whole big area of her hair, so that is what my selection is. So I need everybody to make this same selection. It's half of her face and the entirety of her hair on that other side. If you end up inadvertently missing some part of it over here, so let's just say that you actually came in like this and there was a part of it missing, simply hold down your shift key and surround the area that you want to include again, and it'll include everything. Okay, Command J, it jumps that to its own layer. If you hold down the Option key and you click on it, and just the eyeball, you'll see that's what we've just copied and pasted to its own layer. So this is actually working great for me right now. So here's the trick. I am going to use all of the hair. Instead of a small part that I use for clone stamping, I'm going to use all of the hair. But I have to change the hair so that I don't get this whole repeating pattern part. So to change the hair with this top layer selected, I'm going to hit the T key, Command key, to do a transform on this. And then watch what I do on my screen, and then I'm going to let you guys do it as well. If you hover outside the corner, this lower corner of this, you can actually rotate this image, which is what I want to do. And the reason I'm rotating it is it breaks up the orientation of the hair curls right here. They are now not aligned exactly the way they were in the image that I actually had before. I'm also going to make this image a little bit bigger. So to do that, I'm going to click strict. I'm not going to click the link between width and height. I'm simply going to hover over the height part right here, over the little H letter, and I'm going to click and drag up. It stretches my hair out a little bit, and then I'm also going to go after the width one, and I'm going to stretch it out a little bit as well. So what I'm trying to do is make this different than the hair that exists already in the image. So I've fundamentally changed it. I've made it wider, I've made it taller, and I've twisted its angle. Is this working for all of you guys? If you've done that, then simply hit OK on that, the little check mark that's actually up here. Now, the way I typically work with this, everybody works with these things differently, but the way I work with this is that I want to see where I need to paint this stuff in. So in order to do that, I'm going to put a layer mask on this guy, but I need a black layer mask on here. I need an opaque one. I want to be able to see the image that's actually underneath it. If you click on the image to turn it on that's underneath it, you can see what we've got going on here. It's actually, you know, I can't tell where the hair is that I want to fix is actually happening underneath this guy. So to add an opaque mask to this retouch layer, this new hair layer, make sure it is active, hold down the Option key and click on the Add Layer Mask. And you'll see it puts on a black layer mask. If you've done that, hit Command Z to undo it. If you cannot remember that, if you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, simply click on Add Layer Mask, just like we normally do, but it's added a white layer mask, so this entire image is being shown to us because, again, where masks are white, they reveal, where they're black, they conceal. But with this thing actually active now, simply hit Command I and you invert the mask to make it black. Either way, you get to a black mask. You can actually undo that one last time, make sure that this mask is actually active and selected, and you can, there used to be a guy up here that actually allowed you to invert that mask, but that doesn't exist. So anyway, Command I to simply invert it. Hit the B key to get a brush. I am going to make it a little bit smaller brush, and the edge of this brush is the same thing as the edge of the layer of the cloning that we did. I don't want a perfectly hard edge because I'll spot it. I don't want a completely soft edge because then I'll have texture that overlaps one another. So I'm actually going to go to roughly a 50% hardness. Now, I'll click on this hardness. It got to 52%. Am I going to sit there and spend another 5 minutes trying to use that little slider to get it to 50% or type something? No. I've got a medium hard brush. This is fine. I'm going to click on this, and then I'm going to make white as my foreground. I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. This would do. But I've got a couple of holes in here. I've got one hole that's sitting right in here, but I sort of like what it's actually begun to do. I'm also going to see if I can get just this little bit of skin that's right in here. I want to see if I can fill something in there and possibly something in here so that I end up with a little bit more defined edge. I actually might fill in a little bit in this area that's right up in here as well. So I'm just going to sort of see what happens by using this brush. So a little bit smaller brush to come into this area and click on that. And again, what I'll see happening in here sometimes is you don't want hair to look like it's just starting and stopping out of nowhere. It actually filled in part of it, but it also gave me a hole in another part of it. So I don't really want that. I don't like that part. So Command Z to go back in time. If you have a newer version of Photoshop and you haven't changed the behavior, you can continue to do Command Z and it'll step you back through history. If you have an older version of Photoshop, you have to do Command Option Z to continue to go back. So I am going to leave that, and I'm going to come get this later. I'm going to come down to this little area of hair that's right in here and see if I can't fill that part in, and I feel better about that part. So this is looking reasonably good to me right now. How are you guys? You don't have to have everything done, but do you have enough of something done to feel good about that you're filling in that hole? We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there. It's a multiple process, and that's the trick to doing all of this. It's one of the things that I wanted to make sure we got to today. So, but you're feeling good at least about a part of it, right? Yeah. Okay, perfect. With this top layer active and selected, hold down the Command key and hit E. It merges that work we just did with the mask down into the new version. So it applied the mask, it brought it down, it didn't change anything else, but this is actually a good beginning for me. Make sense? I'm going to do the exact same process again. Double click on the hand to zoom out. Hit the L key to get the lasso tool. Select all this entire half of her head right here.
Wait, how did you merge them again?
Command E. Make sure you've got the top layer selected. Command E is a merge down. So again, the whole new version area is selected again. Command J jumps it to its own layer. I'm going to do the same thing again. Command T to transform it. I'm going to kick it to the side. In this case, I'm going to drag the bottom down to make it a little bit different. I'll kick this side out to make it a little different. I'm just messing with this to try to get it going a little bit different. I'm actually going to relocate it a little bit. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and check the checkbox and say OK for this. I'm going to hold down the Option key and click on Add Layer Mask. It puts on a black one. And then I'm going to go back into the areas that need more work. So in my case, I need everybody to look up at my screen really quickly because I maybe have missed the mark again, but you'll see a way to fix this. I've got an area that's right in here that needs help, and I've got this area right in here that needs help. This stuff down in here, I'm pretty much going to leave that as it is. If I was really crazy about it, I might go after that. But it's this two areas right up in here that I feel like I need help. So again, I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush, make sure white is my foreground color. I'm working on a black mask, and I'm using white to reveal that area. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm going to paint over this area. And in doing that, it worked. However, it doesn't look real to me. I don't have a good start-stop here. It looks like I've done exactly what I've done. So here is the trick. What I want to do, I know that the white dot that I just put on my layer mask is exactly where I want it to be. This is the area that I need to fix, is this part right here. But I've got the wrong hair underneath it. Make sense? So what I want to do is I want to leave the mask in place, but I want to move the hair to see if there's a better fit. To leave the mask in place, you uncheck the link between mask and image. So uncheck this chain link right here. Then select your image layer so that the brackets are now around the image layer. Hit the V key to get the move tool, or simply click on the very top. It's the very top icon of your tool palette. And now you can click and move it around, and you can see the mask is not moving, but the hair that's underneath is moving. And you can move it around to get a better match. You can still continue to transform that image. So if you feel like you rotated it too much, that it's too much of an angle, again, I've broken the link between my image and my mask. So when I do a transform, the mask is not going to change, but the image itself will. So again, with the brackets around the image, Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. I got to back out so that I can see my little handles. Come to the outside of my image, and then I can rotate this, and you can see that you can change everything about what's going on inside just that little area. And so this is actually looking reasonably good. I got to move in. I got to zoom in, take a look at this, and make sure I like what's really going on. So in my case, I feel like I've still got a start-stop problem in here, and it's because now of the mask. I'm fine with the orientation of it all now, but I need to do a little bit better of a blending job in there. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that transform. I'm going to go back to my mask now, and again with my brush, and I'm going to continue this out a little bit. So I'm just, even though I didn't need to fix this area up in here, I needed to sort of continue that hair so it didn't just look like a big dot in the middle, so that it really had more of a beginning and an end to it. I'm also going to check this area that's right down here that seems to be a little bit weak and see if I can't get something else going back down in there. And again, I feel like that part's actually helped me a little bit. However, this is starting and stopping in a really weird area right down in here in my image. So to get rid of that part, it's this area right in here. Hit the X key to get your foreground color to be black and paint across this to remove that little bit of hair that I'd actually added into this. And so now I'm feeling pretty good about where this mask is, where this fix is right here. So again, Command E merges this down into my new version. Then I'm going to zoom out for a little bit and make sure I'm feeling relatively good about this. And you can see I don't have repeating pattern in the hair now. Things have actually changed, and so it becomes, it keeps it more organic. It's not just a clone stamp thing, which is, again, if you get really used to looking at these things, you could spot that clone stamp across the room. Are we good on this? This would be a really good time to save your work right now. So if you save your work, so I'm going to come up to File menu, down to Save As. Again, in your drop-down menu, make sure it's either going to be a Photoshop file or a TIFF file. You guys are pretty good about this, so I don't need to worry about that a whole lot. By default, it's going to save layers and embed your profile, which is exactly what you want it to do. I'm going to put mine in my TOS folder and save it there and say OK. And now I've got a new version that I can begin to work on. But right off the bat, I've eliminated a huge problem, and that would be selecting that skin that is in the middle of all that hair that I know there's no way I was ever going to get. Yes?
When you stretch the hair
Yes.
and replace it, do you sharpen because it's becoming a bit blurry, or?
No, because I'm not really doing a radical transformation. If I was doubling it in size or cutting it in half, it was something really, really radical, I would be more worried about that, but I'm not. So, are you guys good on this part? Are we ready to go on? Okay. So, the next thing I'm actually going to do is the same trick that we did to isolate the blue background, because for me, the biggest challenge in here, although I know that this edge along here is going to be a challenge, the next biggest challenge is definitely going to be the hair that's on these edges that's around here. And since the process of getting those edges is common to all of the way we do a lot of this kind of stuff, I want to go after it before I show you guys really how I would go after this edge over here. Make sense? All right, so to do that, we need to go looking at our channels. So again, what I'm trying to do now is build a mask where the background, where this blue is either white or black, and then the entire figure, hair, body, sweater, everything is the opposite. It doesn't matter which one I do, because I can always invert them. Make sense? All right, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go looking at my channels. If your history is as long as mine is right now, you can click on the link, not the link, you can click on the area that's actually right between these two. That does not want to go away. And that does not seem like that guy's linked on there either. I'm just going to reset my space. And you're probably right, but it's too late. So I'm just going to reset retouching, and it's there. All right, so I'm going to click on the red channel. And again, what I'm looking for now is contrast. That's all I care about. I want as much tonal separation between the hair and the background as that I can get. So in this case, the hair is dark. The background is actually a little bit light. This is the copy of the red channel right here. If I take a look at the green channel, you can see that the green channel actually... the red channel's there. Green channel is slightly better. It made the background a little bit lighter. The hair doesn't seem to have changed a whole lot in tone. But then I go to the blue, and the blue channel is clearly the best. The hair is the darkest. The background is the lightest. So it's already closer to ultimately where I'm trying to get, and so it's the channel to lose. What I will say is that occasionally, guys, you will get into situations like this where you don't really know which is which. And you can actually go ahead and drop down a couple of color sampler points and then just go through the channels and see which one has got the greatest difference in the two. And I'll show you what I mean by that when we take a look in just a second. But I know in looking at this that instinctively it's going to be that. Now, again, in terms of separating the hair, I don't really care about this area in here. I can paint that with a brush. What I care about is the edge transition. This is the area that I care about. So I'm going to zoom into this area over in here. We had this discussion on the first time that we did this before. I keep going to this very same curl here because it's got everything in it. It's the easiest place to talk to you guys about what's going on that's correct or not. So what I want to do in all of this is I'm looking at, there's three different areas that I'm looking at in this, this hair that I'm going to ultimately try to get to be black. And what I need to do is I need to decide what of this really should be completely masked out, what shouldn't be, and what should be transition, what should be essentially what hair in here has some transparency that should be allowing some background to come through. And that's the thing I'm going to start with, and it's this area right down in here. If you take a look at this area, right in this area right down in here, you can see that there's a hole somewhere in here. There's just, and this is very, very, very light in tone. There's color that should be coming through that, because hair is not solid. Hair actually, if you pull a hair out, look at it under a microphone, goes, it's actually got some transparency to it. It's not a solid pigment. There's some transparency to it. And this has actually got some transparency in here. So this is not the place to pick to go black, because if I make this black in my mask, it is saying by definition it has no transparency. I want some of my background to come through this. So I want it to be a really dark gray, but I don't want it to be black. Make sense? So then I'm looking at other areas of the hair up in here. So if I look at the hair shaft that goes up in here, I've got two options in here. Let me see if I can pick something that is a little bit more of a point. I've got two options that are right up in here. I've got this area right down in here that's actually very dark. And I feel like it should be solid. That should be black in my mask. It should be complete. There's no transparency. There's no background that should be coming in there. Does that make sense to you guys? But look at the area that's right above it. This area that's right above it, it's a little bit lighter in gray than the area I was just pointing at, but I believe it too should be solid in my mask. There's not transparency there. That guy should be black as well. The problem is that if I put a point down here in the darker area and make it black, this area that's a little bit lighter right above it will not have gone to black. It'll be very dark gray, but it will not be black. However, if I put a point in this little area up here that's the lighter gray and make it black, the area that's darker will already have gone to black. Does that make sense? So if you really want to get down to the art form of all of this, it's picking where you drop your color sampler points. It's just picking that. And all I can say to you is it's experience. And I'm giving you guys the best experience that I can in terms of doing this. I will also tell you this. I've actually gone through this process in other images and realized after I've gone ahead and built my whole mask and applied it, whatever, that my mask was too aggressive. That the point that I picked was too aggressive. It made for too aggressive a mask. Does that make sense to you guys when I talk about too aggressive a mask? What ends up happening is that your hair on the outside, it becomes really blocky, or the edge transition, it's not believable. You look at it and you think, oh my God, how fake could that be? And then you just tell everybody, hey man, this is my art. It's meant to look bad. I charge more for that. All right, so that's what I'm going to do. To put down our color sampler points, come over to your tool palette over here, click on the one that's the eyedropper. We don't want to pick the eyedropper itself. All that does is sample color. What we want to pick is the color sampler tool, because that actually puts down points and leaves them in place. So I'm going to grab the color sampler tool and I'm going to come over, and again, it's this lighter gray area in the middle right here. And you want to make sure that that color sampler point goes right in the middle. You also want to make sure that your sample size is set to 3 by 3. You do not want this as a point sample, but I would also be nervous about going to a 5 by 5, that a 5 by 5 would actually carry me a little too far out into this area. It wouldn't give me the control that I really want. So with that 3 by 3 sample pick, I'm going to drop my first sample point and it goes right down in here. If you take a look at your menu over in here, in terms of this, you'll actually see, interestingly enough, you know what we haven't done, guys? We have not made a copy of this blue channel yet. So you can leave that color sampler point there. It doesn't matter. We need to make a copy of the blue channel. So click the blue channel and drag it down to make a copy of it. Then double click on the channel and we're going to rename it blue background, because I want a name different than just background, because background is actually the name of this white thing down at the bottom. So to keep it separate, what we're really trying to knock out, name this channel blue background. So and say, okay, and then you'll notice that that color sampler point that we just put down, it doesn't give me RGB readouts anymore. It gives me a readout in K. And the reason it gives me a readout in K is that you can only have shades of gray in a channel. You can't have color in a channel. So Photoshop simply reverts to the K, which is the black ink of a CMYK image. So in K, in this case, 0K would actually be 0 black ink, which is white, or 100% K, which is 100% black ink, which is black, or 50% K, which is medium gray, or 20% K, which is very light gray, 90% K, which is very dark gray. It's giving us readouts in K. However, we are going to work with levels, we're going to work with curves, all of which are in RGB. So instead of getting our readout in K, if you click on the little eyedropper under the number 1, on this drop-down menu, you can come down and say, I want you to show me those values in RGB. It's more instinctive for us to work in. And in my case, I get an RGB value of 76, 76, 76. You should be close. You don't have to be exact, but you should be close. You should be probably somewhere between 70 and 80. Are we all good? So then I will need to put down another point, and I'm actually going to come out here into the background, and I usually do this. I try to keep my points relatively close to one another. You can see, conceivably, again, I'm going to double click on the hand to kick all the way back out. You could put a point down here in the background. You could put a point way out here in the background. You could put something up here at the top. You could put something over here. You can put them all around, but for me, it's easiest to actually keep them relatively close to one another. What you just want to make sure is that you don't put another point down and that it ends up being hit by hair. So again, you wouldn't try to shoot something right here in the middle. There'd be no reason to do that. I'm going to come to this area that's just to the outside of it here, and I'm going to click and set out another point, my point number 2. Again, I'm going to click on the drop-down readout numbers here to go from K value to RGB color. And so now I've got my target. So now I know what I need to do. In the case of this, I've got my hair, which is reading in the mid-70s. I need to get that to 0, because that's what black is. And then the background part that's reading in the sort of the lower 200s, I need to get that to 255, which is white. That's the goal. Are we all good about that? So to do that, again, this is not an adjustment layer. You do not do any of this work on layers. This is all being done in channels. Channels does not have adjustment channels in it. You have to do it directly. It is a destructive process. There, you can go back as long as you've got history up, but once you save this work and close the file and open it back up again, the only way you can go back is to simply start over and do this all over again. So if we end up making too aggressive a mask, we'll know it before we get into deep, and then we'll actually go back and just do this process all over again. Instead of picking this point, I'll pick something a little bit darker, or I'll pick something on the background a little bit different, and just build the mask a second time. Make sense? All right, so Command L brings up the levels dialog box. We are running levels on this blue background channel. I'm going to grab the black point first. It's the slider that's on the left-hand side underneath the big part of the histogram, and I watch these values over here. You see the minute I brought levels up, my info split into 2, and it's now giving me before and after numbers. So the numbers, because I haven't changed anything yet, the numbers have not changed at all. They're the same. But what it's showing me is that the numbers on the left-hand side right over in here are the before numbers. The numbers on the right-hand side of that / are the after numbers. So it's showing you where you started, and then it's showing you what you're doing now. So you'll see when I start to drag this black point guy right here, the second set of numbers over here start to actually go down. So I'm going to watch those numbers. I'm not going to type in values. I'm simply watching these numbers, and I'm going to drag this until I get close to 0, but not quite at 0. So I'm down to a 4. So now what it's telling me is that those 76 numbers, that tone that was 76, 76, 76 is now a 4, 4, 4. And you can see it all has gotten much darker. The reason I stop at 4 is that you don't want this mask to be any more aggressive than it has to be to get the work done that you want it to do. So for instance, so right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the arrow keys. Again, you can see that this number is already selected. So using your arrow keys actually drops the numbers. So again, I'm using my up arrow key, and I'm just tapping till I just hit 0. And this is the problem that, again, I can't explain why this happens, but it's true. You would think that with the original value of 76, 76, 76, that if you type 76 into the black point, you would get it. I got it at 65. So what that's showing me is that I didn't need to be more aggressive. If I put 676 in there, I would have made this mask darker than it needed to be to get to the point that I wanted it to get to. Does that make sense? And you can see what happens here. This is the bad part about what happens here. If you carry your mask too far, this is what you end up with. See how like stringy and blocky all this hair is? There's nothing real and believable about that. That is just god-awful. That's all I can say. That's why I'm trying to be the least aggressive that I can possibly be, but still achieve what it is that I'm trying to achieve. So I'm going to drag this guy back to where I was before. Again, I've got the 444 there. I'm going to go to my arrow keys, tap it in until I just get to 000, and I'm good to go. Now you'll notice that it's also changed the after numbers of my background. These guys actually drop down as well. These things are connected, so you need to, when you change one, we're going to change the white point right now. You need to revisit the black point after you change the white point just to make sure it didn't change. So I'm going to grab the white point slider now and start to drag it back. And again, I'm just watching the after numbers over here. I'm going to get close to 255, but I'm not going to go to 255. I need to stay something short of that. So I'm at 252 right now. I'm going to go again to my arrow keys and tap it in until I just get to 255. Then I'm going to recheck my black point to make sure it didn't jump up and this didn't become like a 2 or a 3 or something in here. It stayed at 0. So now I have a good feeling. These numbers are set correctly. If you guys, looking at your screen up here in levels, your black point should be close to 65 and your white point should be close to 205. If you're way off, you need to let us know because something's not right. Before you say okay to this, I'm going to ask you to zoom back out. So I'm going to hold down the space bar and the command key and zoom back out. I'm sorry, the spacebar command and the option key to zoom back out. You get the negative magnifying glass. And what I want to do is I want to inspect this. I want to look around and see how do I feel about this? How do I like this edge? And you can see all the hair that's actually up in here is considerably lighter than the really black hair right here. That's what you want. Because this hair that's all flyaway hair that's out here is all on its own. It's got transparency to it. It should have some background color in it. So if this is all gone black, your mask is gone way too aggressive. You also should use the preview checkbox that's right here. Turn it on and off just to see what it is you're doing. And what I really look for here is I'm looking for this transition from the darker sort of area of the hair right in here as it starts to transition out in there. Have I been too aggressive about this? And I'm going to show you what a too aggressive one looks like. But you can see I've got transition that's coming out in here. I feel good about that part. If my mask was too aggressive, this is what happens. All of that transition area in here is all blocked up. And it is no longer believable at all. Make sense? All right.
The value I found for mine was 56.
56?
Yeah.
We'll see where it goes. Again, we're going to have to do some other work on this mask because it's not perfect yet anyway. So we'll see. And your 56 actually may be better than my 65. So I think the downside of what I imply here, because again, clearly this number-based system that I'm trying to teach you guys right now, and you would think, well, numbers are absolute, but they're not. There's some clear fudge factor in here. Okay, so I'm feeling pretty good about this, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. Now, I'm going to double click on the hand. I know for a fact in this that I'm going to have trouble areas in here, but what I'm really looking for here is I'm just going to run my cursor around the background to see if I have any inherent problems. I know I've got contamination in the middle of the mask. I know that I need to make the body and the figure much, much darker, but what I don't know is that how are things going in this background? And as you move your cursor around, I am just looking at my info readout. I'm looking at this info readout up here, and you can see when you get into this upper corner in the upper right-hand side, whatever, that this is not a pure white up in here. I'm getting readings of a 249 up in there. That is contamination in my mask. So I'm going to zoom into this area. I'm looking down here at the shoulder. I'm clean on the shoulder. I'm looking over her other shoulder over here. I'm clean on all of that. What I'm really having a problem, the only place that I'm having a problem in my background is this area up in here. What does that tell you about the lens that shot this? It's vignetting. What lens is vignette? Worse than others. Wide. And again, this was not a raw file, so when I brought this in, I didn't have the benefit of using those lens profile corrections inside of Camera Raw, which would have taken care of this problem, but just saying. So I suspect always when I'm looking at images like this, I expect my corners and edges to always give me problems because of that very reason. So I'm going to zoom into this area up here in the top. Now again, I can, as I hover around here, I'm seeing all sorts of numbers in here. The readouts that I'm getting are telling me that I've got contamination in there. Sometimes the contamination is really hard to see, so that's what I was saying. If you hit Command-I to invert this, is it easier to see? It looks like dust in here. Is that a little bit easier to see? So that's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter whether we work in positive or negative here, because I can do this Command-I back and forth till the cows come home. Do you have any idea where that term came from? Yeah, until the cows come home. I know it's kind of weird. The one I always wonder about that's even weirder though is it takes something that takes more than one way to skin a cat. Who skins cats? I know, we've all heard this, right? But it's like, God, that is just sick. Anyway, I digress. Okay, so you can see it looks like there's a sort of a dusting kind of thing that's going up in here. We need to fix that part. The problem is that if I carry my cursor all the way over here and I get really close to the hair, you can see I'm getting these 16s in here. I know that my background right on the edge of the hair is a problem right here. This is one of those cases I can't make this perfect, but I can get pretty close. And so this is how I would go after trying to fix this. Again, I'm still working in my blue background layer here. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm not going to make it a completely hard brush. I'm going to actually make it, again, a 50% soft brush, because the problem I've got with this is that if I make my brush completely soft and I try to work on this area up in here, it will actually overspray into my hair. Some of the soft edge of this brush will hit part of this hair and I'll lose that, and I don't want to do that. However, if I make it a completely hard brush, I will actually see the line that I've actually painted. So by doing a medium soft brush, what I'm doing is I'm giving myself a little bit of a softer edge, a little bit of spray coming in here, but in not letting it be as aggressive as it would be if I had a completely hard brush. Does that make sense, everybody? Guys, the whole rest of this semester, although it seems ridiculous to call 4 weeks a semester. Anyway, the whole rest of this class, this whole issue of up to traveling, hard brushes, soft brushes, medium brushes, whatever, it is just pervasive in this. And when you get really good at this, again, if you get to really good with knowing how to work a tablet, whatever, you can actually control all of those issues from your tablet. But nonetheless, the other problem I have with this is that the minute I try to spray in this area up in here, I'm trying to fix this area up right here in the top. The minute I go too far off to the top, I lose my brush. It becomes a cursor, and I don't want that to happen. So again, I need to work on the pasteboard. To get to the pasteboard, you hit the F key. And with the F key selected, you can hold down the space bar, you get the hand, and you can actually move things around. Now you can actually get your brush completely outside of your image, so I can actually attack this area. I can go after this area to actually get what I want. So I'm going to make this a little bit larger brush. Again, it's got a medium soft edge, but finally I'm going to change the blending mode of this brush to overlay. Now we haven't talked about, we have talked about overlay. I'm going to talk about it again really quick here just for 1 second. I'm going to hit the X key to make my foreground color white. With an overlay brush set to white, in this area out in here, you can see that those little dots, it's actually picking up on those little dots. They're actually a little bit lighter than 50% gray because it's actually painting out that part. But what overlay brush should do is it should restrict where these brushes are actually laying down ink. So again, in overlay, it's a contrast blending mode. It's restricting it, and it's saying anything that's lighter than 50% gray, I'm only going to paint white. Anything that's darker, I'm only going to paint black, and I will protect those other areas. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. The X key to make black my foreground color, and then I want you to watch what I'm doing here really quick before you do it. Typically, one of the worst things that you can do in retouching is to paint strokes like a painter. And most people, that's how they actually start doing this kind of work. So if you look at this edge right here, what most people will do is that, and just watch, they will click on this and they will drag down and they will paint like that. The problem with that is that strokes become obvious in retouching. Now, this is really subtle because of the work and the area that I'm doing this in. However, when we get later on into more retouching, everything becomes more obvious. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Instead, what I want you to do is I'm going to come to this edge right here, and I'm going to click and pull out. I'm going to come down just a little bit more, click and pull out. And I need everybody now to do the exact same thing I'm doing, is clicking and pulling out. I'm avoiding that edge. I'm getting really close to those little feathery hairs, but I'm not on those little feathery hairs at all. Even though I know that some of the background black underneath all this little hair has still got some contamination in it. This is going to be as good as this thing is actually going to get. And by removing the spill that's in here, I'll actually be really well off in this anyway. Then once I get that edge developed, again, I'm going to look down here to make sure that those are all at zeros. I look up at my top corner up in here. If I felt like my top corner up in here still wasn't completely black, then I would go back to a normal brush. I would also change it to a completely hard brush so that there was no spray at all. And then I would click on this corner area right up in here just to make sure that that whole part has been cleaned out. If you hold down the space bar, you can actually temporarily get the hand and you can continue to move around here. And I'm simply looking at the areas that I'm transitioning through all of this. And again, I'm just looking at my readout to make sure those are all still giving me zeros. I'm in this area down in here. I'm going to make my brush smaller so that I'm just reading in this area right down in here. And I'm feeling really good about this part. I've actually cleaned out that background part extremely well. We good on this? Save your work. Up to the File menu, down to Save. Now, if your computer is set up correctly, I want everybody to come over to their History palette and scroll up to the top. You should see 3 history states sitting up at the very top of your image. You should see the one that's actually got the name on it, and then you should see 2 timestamps that should be relatively close to mine. What these are showing you what your image looked like when you saved it. And the advantage of this is we've got 50 states of history, but once we hit that 51st state of history, we lose the original one, and there's no getting it back. But these timestamps will actually take us back. So the reason, just one second, the reason these become important to us is that if inadvertently, so let's say you're Henry, and all of a sudden you realize that your virgin is now a new color, and you didn't bother to save another copy of it. Instead of undoing all of your work, you can do these timestamps back in history to find out where the color shift happened so that you don't lose everything. Make sense? Katya? Okay, if you don't have the timestamps, you need to set this up in your history palette. So come over to the little drop-down menu right here for history, down here to history options, and you need to make sure these 3 things are checked. The very top one, is always checked by default. This automatically create new snapshot when saving is the one that you did not have checked that we need checked. And then this show new snapshot dialog box by default. All that means is that when we make our own snapshot instead of a saving snapshot, that a screen will open up and it'll allow you to name that state. Okay. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out again. Now, there are people I know who continue to work exactly this way. This bothers me. I don't work in negative very well. I prefer to work in positive. To each his own. If you guys want to continue to work here in negative, go ahead, although it's not going to match what I'm doing on my screen. So I'm going to ask you just to humor me and shift it. I just prefer to work in a positive space. So I'm going to hit Command-I to bring this back. And now I need to continue this. So what I've got going on my mask here that I know that's working well for me is that I've got actually the hair part is separating. I actually need to look at my mask because I think I've got problems in this mask in the area that's right around the hair part. I don't think I've fixed those parts yet. And the whole rest of the body, I need to deal with all of that. So again, I'm looking at my blue background. I'm going to zoom into this really closely. And we needed to make a decision here. And the decision that we need to make, I'm looking at the top right-hand part of this girl's hair. There are areas in here where the background's actually showing through, and those areas need to stay in these lighter grays. You do not want to paint those out, because this is what gives your edge and your mask's realism, is the fact that you do have these holes in the hair. However, you'll see here, it looks like there's contamination all through this. These are actually highlights on this girl's hair. So what I need to do is I need to figure out what is highlight and what is background that I want to keep. So to do that, you need to scroll up to the top of your channel, and you need to click on the RGB guy, and you can see that there's a line that's running pretty much right down this edge right here. All the parts that are on this side need to remain. All the parts that are on this side need to go. However, look at these 2 spots right down here. These 2 spots that are well within her hair, those are actually background, and those should remain. So I'm hoping I actually still have those guys. To see, I'm going to go back to my blue background, and yes, it's those 2 guys. It's that guy right there and that guy right there needs to stay. Then all of this out here needs to stay, but all of this in here, this is all highlights on the girl's hair. So to fix that, the B key to get a brush, make sure that black is your foreground color. Make sure that you're using a completely hard brush. You do not want any overspray at all on this, because we're just trying to control these areas, and you need to then go ahead and paint all of this out. You can paint onto her face, it doesn't matter. That's all got to go that way anyway. That's going, that's going. Again, this little area right here and this little area right here need to stay, but the stuff that is around that was all highlight. So that's all good. Hold down the space bar to temporarily get the hand. I'm going to recheck my RGB guy again to make sure. Again, those 2 areas and this whole area down in here, those are all staying as background, but the rest of it can go. So I'm back into this area right here. This all goes, that goes, that goes, that goes. This is all background down in here, so that's all staying. Hold down the space bar to get the hand. I'm going to actually come up to the very top of this girl's head. I believe all of the other stuff on the other side is all hair. There's no background showing through any of this. And as I get down, until I get down to the very bottom, so the very bottom down here, I'm going to stay away from. However, if I go back to my blue background channel, I know that all of this area in here, this is all black. So I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to go to a much larger brush because I want to make this work quick. And I can paint through all of this area in here. Again, I'm painting well into her face. Stay away from the edges here, but you can actually paint the majority of her face. Don't go after any of the edges. I'm just coming down here into the bottom part because a lot of times when I do this, this helps me. It helps remind me what I'm really trying to do. So again, I'm staying away from all the edges. For this whole area that's in the very bottom down here that I know is all sweater, that all needs to be included in my mask, that all needs to be black on my mask, I'm simply going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool, and I'm going to drag around this entire lower area of her and come in, and then again, black is my foreground color. Option delete fills that with black. Command D to deselect. So I'm getting here, I'm going back to my brush again, I'm going to paint through a little bit more of her hair. Again, I'm staying away from all of those edges as much as I possibly can, but I'm feeling pretty good about this. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to catch back up. How are we feeling about this? Is this working? Okay, so we've been at this for a half hour now, and I know that that seems like, my God, how long could you possibly take to actually do this? Once you do this a dozen times, this just, it goes so quick. It's so simple to do. So stay with this. How did the pen tool go, by the way? Did it work for you? Did it seem like, oh God, that was, how many people do you know try to paint an edge? Like they'll go in and try to paint this shoulder, and they'll be painting on a mask, and they paint one stroke in and they realize they've made a mistake, so then they shift their foreground and background colors, and then they paint it back out, and that's also a mistake, and then they paint it again, and they just go back and forth and back and forth, and 30 minutes later you're still going back and forth, whereas if you spent 5 minutes with the pen tool, it'd be done and over. Anyway. Okay, are we ready to move on? Are we good about moving on? Okay, I'm going to come into this left shoulder that's over here really fast. And I'm going to fix this area in here again. I'm going to go to the brush, the B key. I'm going to change my blending mode back to overlay. I'm going to go ahead and leave my brush as a completely hard brush. Again, the overlay part of it's going to control really where it paints out. It's not going to be anything else. So I'm going to make this brush really small just to, again, to reiterate what we've talked about here before. I've made it really, I'm going to make it even smaller just so that you guys know. With my blending mode set to overlay and black is my foreground color, when I try to paint on white right here, nothing happens. because of the overlay blending mode is restricting it. If I hit the X key and I go to white as my foreground color and I come down here to this area that's black and try to paint it, nothing happens because again, the blending mode is restricting that to only, again, things that are lighter than 50% gray will take on white, things that are darker will take on black, but those respective areas are protected. So you cannot, in an overlay blending mode, paint white on a black area and you can't paint black on a white area. However, I can use it to determine this edge right here. So I am going to hit the X key again to make black my foreground color. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger, and I'm simply going to I'm going to overlap this edge right here. Don't make a giant brush and overlap. Don't make Photoshop work any harder than it already has to work. But do make it do its job for you. So I wouldn't use a giant brush here. But I also wouldn't come in like this and try to paint just that line. I'm going to actually go ahead and overlap this slightly, and I'm simply going to paint one stroke all the way up like this. Now, again, we talked about this last week or a couple days ago when we were doing the original Sunny. There's a transparent edge right here. You just saw it come in just a little bit. It's this top line of her shoulder right here. You don't want to hit that a second time. If you do, watch up my screen really quickly. I'm going to undo this really quickly. Just watch my screen. Don't do this, but I'm going to zoom in so you can see it big time. I'm going to go over this once, and you can see it kept a transition there that actually keeps that as a soft edge, which you want. If you hit it a second time, it lays down ink in that transparent area, and it makes this edge more opaque and a harder edge, and it's not the soft sweater that we just had. So you want to do that stroke once. You don't want to do it multiple times. So I'm going to undo that part. I am going to continue up her neck, though, and there's a small little problem right there on that part of her neck. So then I'm going to back out. A couple other things. So I've got this whole area now has actually, it's exactly the way I want it to go. So you could paint the rest of it with a brush, but using the lasso tool is usually faster. So I'm going to hit the L key to get the lasso tool, and I'm simply going to drag inside this line right here to get all of the fingers, to get a whole bunch of that area that's actually out there, and then simply fill this with black. Black is my foreground color. Option delete fills it with black. Command D to deselect. Holding down the space bar to simply get the hand to move over. I've got a whole nother big area that's right in here that's also, I can just grab, it's just more of her face, her skin, do the same trick. Lasso tool, option delete to get rid of that. Command D to deselect. As I then get over to the other side of her face, I cannot be that cavalier about that. I've actually got to be more concerned about the control that I'm actually going to exercise in this area over in here. So I'm now at the fingers on her right hand on the right side of the image, the other side of her. So I'm going to go after these guys. Again, it's back to an overlay brush. The B key, make sure that it is still an overlay brush, and I'm going to make sure that this is still a hard overlay brush. And it actually is. I'm going to zoom in slightly to the fingers right here. I don't need to worry about this area right up in here because it's fingers against all that black hair. This is also fingers against her skin. I'm not really worried about that. I'm not really worried about the bottom part right here. Where I get into trouble is this edge right in here. So I'm going to click on this edge right in here to drag it down on her fingers to try to give myself a little bit more of an edge that I can work on, and that's actually giving me, I'm trying to develop the lines to color inside. So I'm going to come down to this part, and I'm going to continue down to that part as well. And so those lines were actually great. I'm going to zoom in even a little bit more for this guy right here. Now I've got a problem with this guy right here, and it's the fingernail. So I could use my overlay brush to actually get the bottom part of the finger. You can see I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller to go after that part. So it's down a little bit smaller, and again, I'm not going to come over that edge too much because there's dark hair out here that will actually pick up on that. So I don't want to do that, but that actually gives me a little bit broader part. Where I run into trouble is the tip of the fingernail. Now, I know people who would go in there and just hammer this with a brush. That is not what I'm going to suggest you do. Instead, I'm going to suggest you zoom in a little bit more, hit the P key to get the pen tool, and then click here to actually set a point. Come out to the very tip of the fingernail, click and set another point, and then come back into this part up into here and click to get the curve of the fingernail. You don't need to worry if your curve goes up into this black space because it's already meant to be there. And then simply come back and complete your path. So I've actually got a path that is now describing that fingernail shape. I'm going to go to my path palette. I'm going to leave this as a work path. I don't need to save this. I'm never going to go back in here and use this guy again. If for some reason you were going to use this guy again, you would simply click on Save Path and call it Fingernail and say OK. And now I'm going to load this path as a selection. Hover over the icon of the path, hold down the Command key and click. It loads it as a selection. You guys probably saw, though, when you were doing if you didn't soften that selection slightly, it ended up looking too cut out. It looks like you've gone in with an X-Acto knife. So I need to soften this selection just a little bit. Up to the Select menu, down to Modify, down to Feather, and I'm going to do a 1/2 pixel, 0.5. Really, really, really small, just taking a little bit of that edge off. This is now giving me the selection that I want. I'm still working on my blue background channel. Again, black is still my foreground color, so Option Delete fills that with black. Command D to deselect. And now you can see that I truly have the shape of that fingernail is maintained. Now you may go, Jesus, Versa, that is so anal retentive. I can't believe you're being, this is what makes you, this is what separates the $9 an hour retoucher from the $2,000 a day retoucher. They pay attention, Katie.
Can you go back and show how to fill it again?
Yep. Where did I lose you? Do you have the selection going? Oh, it's the same thing that we've always done, the keyboard shortcut. Option Delete is always fills with foreground color. Command Delete is always background color. If you can't remember that part, go up to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and in this drop-down menu, you can fill with either foreground, background, black, or white. Or, if that matter, you can actually grab the color picker. This will bring up the color picker. So, you good on that? Yeah, let me see. Okay, so you haven't made the selection yet, so go to your path palette.
I just did something with that, like, took away, like...
Then simply go back in history. So click on to get rid of your menu. Yeah, just click somewhere out here in the title. Come back here in history and go back to close path, you're fine. So that's just, you've made your path. You're good. Go to path. Hold down the Command key. Click on that path. It's now a selection. You need to soften it slightly, so up to the Select menu, down to Modify. Modify. Modify over to Feather. Put in 0.5 and say OK. Perfect, and then go back to your blue background. That selection is now made, and you want to fill that with black. Black is your foreground color, so Option, Delete. The whole in Command Z to undo that. You can go up to your Select menu. Let's try that again. No, you're doing Option Delete. Option. No, you're right. Command D to deselect, so you get rid of that. Perfect.
And was that the smooth selection that went in that menu?
No, to soften that up is Feather. I'll show you guys again. So this is my selection going right here. Again, I've now got my path going. You can see this is the path that I've drawn. Holding down the Command key and clicking on that, it loads the path as a selection. But again, it's too perfect. So up to the Select menu, down to Modify, to Feather, not Smooth. Smooth only knocks off hard edges. Feather will soften that edge. So Feather, a 1/2 pixel, say OK. And then again, working on my background layer right here, Option Delete, Command D to deselect. Are we good? Okay, so a good part of the rest of this, we can actually then go back to a regular brush to paint in, because you can see we've built most of the lines that we need. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I'm going to hit the B key again to go to a paintbrush, make sure that it's a normal blending mode now. Again, we don't need the overlay part of it because we've established the edges. You just need to stay inside the edges, so don't go too wild with this thing. And don't make your brush too big. So at any rate, and also make your brush completely hard. You don't want to do any overspraying at all. And so then I'm simply going to come into these areas right here, and you can see I can paint all down this line, all of this. Again, make sure that you take your time and don't hit edges that shouldn't be hit. Again, simply holding down the space bar to get temporarily get the hand to actually move. If you feel like your line is too small here to actually paint between those edges, then simply go back to your overlay brush and make that edge line a little bit bigger. But for me, I feel like I've got most of this part in here, works pretty good. Don't forget, you can always use the lasso tool part. So I'm going to hit the L key to select a whole area in here. And that part all is good. And I can come back up into this area up in here. And that part's good, and I can come back down here. And all of this is a part of my selection. And again, with the selection going, Option Delete, Command D to deselect. So this part's going pretty well for me. I know I've got a problem with this shoulder over here. I'm going to deal with that in just a second. But I want to get the rest of this area down here. And you can see in here, this is something some of you guys missed, and it was actually showing through her hand right. I am going to change it back down to overlay, and I'm simply going to paint in this area right in here, and this is actually doing a pretty good job for me, so I'm going to go ahead and just use this method. If it wasn't doing as good a job for me, then I would probably again outline this with the pen tool, soften it just a little bit, and then hit it again, but that seemed to work pretty well. I'm going to go back to a normal blending mode just to paint again the area that's all around this. A little bit more. You've got still a problem that's this edge right here, which I haven't gotten yet. It's where her face is along this edge right here, and there's hair on the inside of this, inside this little area right in here. So again, I'm going to go back to an overlay brush, and then I am going to paint right along this line, because if you paint your overlay brush along the edge, it'll actually darken that hair that's in the background, and the hair is actually correct. It's not wrong, so I don't want to make it any darker. So I'm simply using my overlay brush to buy me that little bit of space. I'm going to zoom out again, and then I've got a big chunk of skin right here that I can, oh, that sounded gross, that I can actually get with a lasso tool. Again, it just makes it a little easier. You guys will see when we get to tablets that doing this kind of work with a tablet is so much easier. So you guys should be getting pretty good to this point. Again, I've got a big chunk of her face over here on this side that I can just get with the lasso tool. And Command D to deselect. So I'm feeling pretty good about this part down in here. You can see that the whole rest of the hand down here, again, that's something I can get with the lasso. I'm going to stay away from this edge right over in here. I'm going to stay away from that until I build that upper edge using another trick. I'm not going to do that part over there. So again, Command D to deselect, but I can get the rest of part of this hand right here. I can just get rid of this part really quick. So it gets me pretty close. Command D to deselect. I'm going to double click on the hand and take a look at my handiwork and make sure everything's going well. You can't save too often, so I am going to save my file again. You'll notice again then if I go up to the top right here, I've got yet again another timestamp. It's now actually 11:43 and 48 seconds. We're going to get through this and then we'll take a break for lunch. We will come back. Believe it or not, this is a lot of the majority of the work we've already done. We got many other things to get to today. So is everybody good on this part? Okay. So I need to build this shoulder, and the problem in building this shoulder is if I come in there and take a look at it, there's not enough there to use an overlay brush. I don't have any idea where it is. I could try to use the pen tool again to get this, and that would be a good process to probably try to go after. The problem with the pen tool here is though the top edge of that sweater is fuzzy, and I'm not going to get any of that fuzzy character of that. The pen tool is going to give me a relatively hard line. Even if I soften up that pen tool, if I feather that pen tool edge a little bit, it's still not going to give me that really fuzzy edge. So that's probably not an option for me. So I'm going to employ the very same trick I did to build this thing as far as I've already built it. I'm going to look at channels to see, is there any channel that can just give me this edge? I don't care about anything else in here. All I'm looking for is this top edge. I don't care about the body, the hand, the background. I don't care any about that. All I want is this edge. So that's all I'm going to look for. I'm going to go back up to the top. I'm going to click on my red channel. And the red channel is giving me relatively good separation between the sweater and the background. I'm going to look at the green channel. I need you guys to do this with me. Practice is perfect, makes this what it makes it. Green channel, the background lightened up and it's becoming much closer to the sweater, so that's not a good option for me. And then I'm gonna look at the blue channel, and the blue channel sucks. The blue channel is what my problem is right now, because I'm working on a copy of the blue channel and it was already bad. So it's not going to be the blue or the green, it is going to be the red. So I'm going to click on the red channel. I'm going to drag it down to the little dog-eared guy to make a copy of it. I'm going to rename this red copy and I'm going to call it temporary shoulder. Now, you might think, well, Versa, there's no real reason to make this temporary shoulder. Why are you naming these things, whatever? As time goes on, I end up with images sometimes that'll have 30, 40, 50 channels in them. And even though I can go in and try to figure out what they are, it's an awful thing to try to do. If I name them, I know what they are. And especially if I name something temporary like this, I know if it's done its job, throw that thing away. Because you don't need clutter. It's already too cluttered. There's already way too much shit going on. I don't need extraneous stuff that I don't need. So I'm going to use this guy to build the edge I needed to build, and then I'm going to pitch it. But if I didn't pitch it, if I wanted to keep it for a certain reason, you want to give it a meaningful name so that when you come back to this in 6 months, you can look at it and say, oh, I understand what this is meant to be, or what this was used for. So it's the same thing in naming your layers. That you should just get in the habit of doing that. Okay, so that's the point I'm going to do. I'm going to zoom into this edge really quickly because, again, I don't care about the hand here. I just care about this edge. And if we take a look at this edge is actually the same issue that I had with the hair. I need to decide on this what in the background needs to be black and what on the sweater needs to be white, because that's how I'm going to go after this. It may be the wrong order. Again, I may have to invert this, but what I'm going for is the sweater's already light, I'm going to make it lighter. The background's already darker, I'm going to make it dark. So it doesn't matter which way I go after this. However, in looking at making the sweater, look at this sweater, this top edge that I've got right here. You can see that there's an area of gray that's right in here. If you look at my readouts, it's roughly in the 200s. However, there's an area over here that's a little bit lighter. You can look at that, and that's actually in the 220s. If I set my sample point for where I'm hovering over this right now, if I set it to this and make this go white, this area that is a darker gray will not have gotten to white. So if I make this area right here that's in the 220s to go to white, this area down here that's in the 200s will not have gotten there. It'll still be 20 points short. However, if I use this area right down in here that is in the 200s, if I make it white, the area that is lighter will have already gotten to white. So again, it's where do you pick your points? So in this case, I want to pick this, the darkest of the areas to get to white because I know that'll carry everybody else with it. Make sense? So I'm going to put a point down there. So again, going back to your color sampler tool, I'm going to drop a point right here. Now I know I've got fuzzy sweater up here, so I'm actually going to put a point a little further up in the background. I don't want something right here. There's too much chance that the fuzziness of the sweater is impacting something that would be this close. So I'm going to drop something that's up in this range right here, and now I've got my 3 and 4 points. Again, I'm going to click on my drop-down menu and change these to RGB values. And now you can see what's going on. Now this is the inverse of what we did before. When we did this before, the point that was over here on our left-hand side, this was the one that was in the hair, that's the one we wanted to make black. This is now the one we want to make white. Don't lose sight of what these are just because these two have been flipped in order. I want to take this area and push it to white, this point number 3. I want to take this point number 4 area and push it to black. So again, Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. I'm going to start with the white point first this time, and I'm going to start to click and drag it back, and I'm simply watching these readouts right here, and I'm going to get close to 255, but not quite there. I'm at 254 right now. I've stopped, and I'm going to go to my arrow keys right now, and one tap of a down arrow key took that to 255. Then I'm going to go after my black point, which is these guys right here, and I need to get this guy down to 0. So I'm going to click and drag this to bring it down to 0, or to get close to 0, but not quite there. I went too far, so I'm going to go to my arrow keys to back this point. I'm just going to drag it to get back off of this just a little bit. So I'm at now 7, so now I'm going to go to my arrow keys. And again, I always hit the arrow keys in the wrong direction. The only one it takes to get there. Now, I can see that I've actually got a good transition. This is the fuzziness that we're actually talking about on this edge. I want to keep all that fuzziness. That's actually what's making this whole selection believable. That's why I didn't want to use the pen tool, as I would never have anything that looked remotely like that. However, I can see a world of contamination that's sitting up here in this background. So I'm going to have to fix that part. Again, before you actually say okay to this, use your preview checkbox to turn it on and off, and see if you really feel like this is giving you what you want it to be, and this is giving me what I actually want this to be. So I'm going to look back on this to make sure that none of my values change. Everything is still at 255 and 0, so I'm going to go ahead and say okay. So everybody should have something that looks something like this. I still need to clean this out a little bit. You can see all that dusty contamination that's sitting up here in the top. However, I don't want to be really brutal about this, so again, I'm going to do the same trick I did when I was trying to get close to the hair. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make sure it is an overlay brush, and I'm going to change its softness now back to about a 50% softness. So I don't get serious overspray down into here, but that I get a little bit of control in that. Black is my foreground color, so I'm going to come into this area and look where my brush edge is right now. I am going to click here and pull back. That 50% softness will spray a little bit into this fuzziness part, but not tons. So it should give me the transition that I'm hoping for here. You don't need to worry about the hand. We've already got the hand part. So I'm clicking and pulling away, clicking and pulling away, clicking. Don't try to paint that line. You want to click and pull away. It gives you a much, much, much better, more organic edge. And so I'm simply tapping and pulling away from all of this to get that part out. Hold down the space bar to temporarily get the hand and knock all of this out. And this last little bit down here. And that part looks pretty good to me. I see a little bit of a problem right here in the white on this other side right here really quick, so I'm going to hit the X key to get to my white brush. Painting white is my foreground color, and I'm going to click and pull down in this direction. I'm going in the opposite direction just to get that little bit of edge problem out right there. And the rest of this actually looks pretty good to me. So has everybody got a reasonably good edge like this? We're good? Okay, so we're going to use this now. And again, we talked about this before. If you take a look at this, if I load this thing as a selection right now, wherever the area is black does not get selected at all. Wherever the area is white is completely selected. And then these areas, not that they matter to me because I'm not going to use them, but areas of gray will be partially selected. Does that make sense to everyone? So again, I'm simply going to load this as a selection. To load it as a selection, hover over the icon of the channel, hover over, hold down the command key and click. You've now loaded this as a selection. You've got the marching ants going. I'm going to go back to my blue background right now because I'm going to paint on my blue background using this selection. Are we good on that? So I'm going to zoom into this edge so you can see what's going on. It's sitting right here. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush, change it back to normal. Again, the selection is going to control where this paint goes actually down. I'm going to make our brush a little bit larger. It doesn't really matter in this case whether you have a soft brush or a hard brush because the selection is controlling where this is going to happen. So I'm really going to paint right over that line. So again, I want to zoom in here a little bit more just to reiterate this to you guys one more time. So I'm going to click here and start, and you can see I've already made a mistake, and it's white is my foreground color. So Command Z to undo that, make black black your foreground color, and I'm going to click and I'm going to paint this edge. But again, this is just like the version we looked at before. You want to do this in a single stroke, because if I come back and hit this a second time, it puts more density into that transition area, and that's not correct. The selection that we made was correct, but I can repeatedly go over this. I can go over it 10 times and I can lose all of that transparency. It will all be a really nasty, ugly edge. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to make sure that I do get down to the very end of this. That's all I needed it to do, was to make that edge. So Command D to deselect. I'm going to throw my temporary shoulder away. It's done its job. I'm still working on my blue background. I'm going to zip back out. Then I'm going to grab my lasso tool, the L key, and I'm simply going to trace inside that line that I made. Stay away from the edge. And fill it with black. Command D to deselect. Double click on the hand and you have got $1 million mask. I know, save your work. To see how well we did, go up to the top, click on your whole RGB channel guy, go onto your layers palette. We are going to work on the new version. The original version, its eyeball is turned off. I'm going to make sure that the white background is on so that I can actually see what's behind all of this. So I've got some idea what's going on back there. Then I'm going to scroll down to my blue channel mask right here. I'm going to hold down the Command key and hover over the icon and click to load it as a selection. And then I'm going to come back up to this guy up at the top and simply add a layer mask. And that is your blue background. I know. So I know a lot of you guys are saying, well, who cares, right? This is how you would actually knock this figure out to put it on a different background. We'll take a look at something else in here in just a second. Katie.
Can you just go back to the last step?
Sure. Where did I lose you?
With combining channels and stuff.
So using the temporary shoulder to paint onto the regular blue background channel, is that? Show me. All right, so it looks like you've made your whole shoulder. Your mask is finished, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can take your temporary shoulder away because it's done its job. You don't need it anymore. Come back to your regular layers. Good. We've got our new version there. Turn the eyeball off of Sunny off. This thing that's up here at the very top, you need to go ahead and merge that down because that's part of your, so hit Command D to deselect first. Good, and then just click on this layer to make it active and turn its eyeball because that was your new hair. Yeah, and merge that down, Command E. Perfect. So then we're just going to apply the layer mask onto this guy. So come back over here to blue ground, hover over, you don't need to pick it, just hover over the icon. It's okay with picking it. Hold down the Command key, click, loads it as a selection, scroll back up to the top and click on your RGB guy. So you need to see your whole image. And then for here, we're just going to add it as a layer mask.
So I just
Click on it. And that's your blue background. So, what else can we do with this guy? We will pick this up when we get back. So at this stage of the game, again, Command D to deselect. Let me go ahead and put that back on here. That's my blue background. Command S to actually save, and I'll see you guys at 1 o'clock. Are there questions about this first, though? Are we good on this? Is going through this at a much, much, much slower pace, is this helping you guys? Is this already knew all of this? This is really redundant? Blah, 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 blah. The reason I'm spending so much time with this is that, again, this goes back to the thing that I've said at the very beginning of this class. If you can make the perfect selection, you can do anything. And this is a pretty perfect selection. I mean, look at the quality of that. I'll see you guys at 1. Yeah.